Is there any maritime disaster more legendary than the sinking of the Titanic? It's a story we all know and are fascinated by. But what if I told you that it's not even the worst shipwreck in history? Here are 12 shipwrecks that are even more tragic than the Titanic. Don't forget to watch the video and subscribe to my channel. Number 12. The Essex. Nearly 200 years ago, the whaling ship Essex was hunting sperm whales in the southern Pacific. On November 20, 1820, Captain George Pard led a whaleboat expedition while the crew repaired the ship. Suddenly, a massive 85-foot sperm whale attacked, striking the vessel and creating chaos. It hit again, ramming the bow before disappearing. Water flooded the ship, forcing the crew to launch the remaining whaleboats, grabbing navigational tools, bread, and water as Essex sank. All 20 crew members survived the initial strike but found themselves stranded in the vast Pacific, miles from land. Captain Pard aimed for the Marquesas Islands, but fears of cannibals made them drift south, hoping to find another ship. Days turned into weeks, then months, as their supplies ran out. Starving, they resorted to cannibalism. After 3 months, 2 whaleboats were spotted by passing ships, and only 8 of the original 20 survived. The tragedy of the Essex remains one of history's most brutal maritime disasters. Number 11. USS Indianapolis. In July 1945, as World War II neared its end, the USS Indianapolis, a 610-foot heavy cruiser carrying 1,195 sailors and Marines, was struck by tragedy in the Pacific. After completing half its journey, the ship was hit by 2 torpedoes fired by a Japanese submarine, causing a devastating explosion that split the vessel in two. The ship sank in 12 minutes, claiming 300 lives. The survivors faced the vast Pacific with few lifeboats and life jackets, covered in oil, suffering from severe sunburns by day and freezing nights. As they drifted, hungry sharks began to attack, growing bolder over time. Despite sending distress signals, no help came. 3 stations that received the messages failed to respond due to negligence or disbelief. It took 4 days before a U.S. naval aircraft found the survivors. When rescue arrived, only 316 of the original crew were still alive, making the USS Indianapolis one of the most tragic shipwrecks in history. Number 10. SS Central America. In the mid-19th century, the U.S. experienced a gold rush, with the Californian Gold Rush drawing thousands of miners west. The steamship SS Central America was the key vessel for transporting gold. On September 3, 1857, it departed Colón, Panama, loaded with over 9 tons of gold, heading to New York City for the 44th time in 4 years. 6 days later, a hurricane hit off the Carolinas, with 105 miles per hour winds tearing sails and flooding the ship. By September 11, the boiler failed, leaving the Central America powerless. Captain William Herndon raised the U.S. flag upside down, but no help came. Eventually, 2 ships appeared, allowing 153 passengers to escape in lifeboats. Many stayed behind, trying to save the ship and its cargo, but rescue never came. On September 12, at 8 p.m., the SS Central America sank, claiming 425 lives. The loss was devastating, but the gold's value, worth $300 million today, triggered financial panic and led to the Panic of 1857, the first global economic crisis. The shipwreck left a lasting mark on history. Number 9. Sultana. Just 8 years after the SS Central America's sinking, another maritime disaster struck the U.S. In April 1865, following the Civil War, former Union prisoners were eager to return home. They boarded the Sultana, a 260-ton steamship meant for 375 passengers but crammed with over 2,400 due to a $22.75 government payment per soldier, about $51 today. Captain J. Cass Mason prioritized profit over safety, neglecting major repairs to the ship's faulty boiler and opting for a patch instead. On April 27, just 3 days after leaving Vicksburg, the Sultana's boiler exploded. While some suspected sabotage, it was the faulty boiler that caused the blast. The explosion shattered the ship, killing many instantly and trapping others when the overloaded decks collapsed. Survivors were thrown into the cold Mississippi River, clinging to debris until they reached safety. Only around 700 of the 2,400 passengers survived, roughly 30%. Captain Mason was among the dead. Number 8. Costa Concordia. Francesco Schettino, captain of the 952-foot Costa Concordia, made headlines in January 2012 when the luxury cruise ship carrying 4,229 passengers struck an underwater rock near the Italian island of Giglio. In a bid to impress a woman on deck, Schettino had steered the ship dangerously close to shore at night while traveling at 15.5 knots. This reckless maneuver created a 174-ton gash in the ship's side, causing it to flood and list to starboard. Schettino downplayed the severity and delayed alerting rescue teams, delaying the evacuation for over an hour. He was later seen in a lifeboat before most passengers had evacuated, claiming he fell in due to the ship's tilt, an explanation met with disbelief. After 6 hours, the evacuation was complete, but 32 people had tragically died. Schettino received a 16-year prison sentence, and the cruise line paid $91 million in compensation, nearly 5 times more than the White Star Line paid for the Titanic disaster. The Costa Concordia proved to be a costly tragedy in every way. Number 7 SS Princess Alice. London's River Thames, known for landmarks like Big Ben and Tower Bridge, holds a dark secret. In September 1876, the Princess Alice paddle steamer was returning from Sheerness when it collided with the SS Bywell Castle, a much larger cargo ship. Despite Captain William Grinstead's efforts to steer clear, the Bywell Castle tore the Princess Alice in half, causing it to sink quickly. With the river only 1/3 of a mile wide, many passengers, especially women in heavy dresses, couldn't swim. The collision was especially tragic as it happened near sewage pumping stations, which had released 90 million gallons of raw sewage just an hour earlier. Survivors were left to fight for their lives in a river tainted with filth and debris. Out of around 700 passengers, only 130 survived, with more succumbing to illness days later. The Princess Alice disaster remains one of the most devastating maritime tragedies in history. Number 6 Lula. In September 2002. The ferry Lula, a 260-ton vessel, left Ziguinchor in southern Senegal for Darar, the capital. The ship typically made the 300-mile trip twice a week but had been out of service for nearly a year due to engine repairs. When it resumed operations in late 2002, it was restricted to one weekly trip for engine testing. Despite this, demand for tickets was immense. On September 26, Lula set sail with 1,863 passengers, far exceeding its 580-passenger capacity. Reports indicated it was listing due to overcrowding. The atmosphere was cheerful until 11 p.m., when a severe storm hit. The ferry, top-heavy with passengers on the upper deck, capsized within minutes, exposing its bottom. Many were trapped in air pockets inside the overturned ship. The crew, caught off guard, failed to send a distress signal in time. Nearby fishing boats responded only after survivors launched flares. Official rescuers arrived the next morning, but it was too late for those still inside the ferry. 16 hours after the disaster, Lula sank entirely, claiming 1,799 lives. Only 64 survivors remain to tell the story of Africa's deadliest maritime tragedy. Number 5 SS Eastan. After the Titanic disaster, new safety regulations were introduced, including the Federal Seamen Act of 1915, which required passenger ships to carry enough lifeboats. The SS Eastland, a 265-foot ship known as the Speed Queen of the Great Lakes, was affected by this law. Though admired for its speed and design, the Eastland was notoriously top-heavy and unstable. Ironically, the act worsened these stability issues. Initially designed for 6 lifeboats, the ship was now equipped with 11 lifeboats, 37 life rafts, and about 2,500 life jackets, mostly on the upper deck. Experts warned that this added weight could lead to capsizing, and on July 24, 1915, their fears came true. While docked on the Chicago River to board employees for a company picnic, the ship began to list to starboard. Efforts to correct the balance by flooding ballast tanks only made it worse, and the Eastland tilted 25 degrees within minutes, rolling onto its side. Passengers on the upper deck scrambled over the railing, while others were thrown into the cold water below. Those below deck faced chaos, with furniture crashing and water flooding in. Of the 2,500 on board, 844 lives were lost, most just yards from the riverbank, making the Eastland disaster one of the deadliest maritime accidents in history. Ironically, the lifeboats intended to save lives contributed to the tragedy. Number 4 White Ship Long. Before the tragedy of the SS Eastland, another maritime disaster struck, the White Ship in 1120. This vessel, similar to a Viking longship, was carrying English nobles, including King Henry I's heir, William Adelin, from France to England. Captain Thomas Fitzstephen, eager to impress, pushed the ship to race past the king's vessel, despite the dangers. Overconfident in the white ship's speed, the crew failed to navigate safely and struck an uncharted rock near Barfla, Normandy, causing the ship to capsize. Nearly 300 passengers, including William Adelin, perished. This catastrophic loss left England without a rightful heir and set the stage for King Henry I's death 15 years later, sparking a civil war and widespread starvation. This tragedy underscores the devastating consequences of reckless decisions and the fragile nature of power. Number 3. Dona Pass. In December 1987, the MV Dinapa, a 305-foot ferry in the Philippines, set sail from Liat with 4,400 passengers, far beyond its 1,518 passenger capacity, due to corruption. On December 20 at 6:30 a.m., it departed, heading to Manila. The journey began smoothly, but around 10:30 p.m., disaster struck when the Dinapa collided with the MT Vector, a 170-foot oil tanker. Despite clear skies and calm seas, neither crew was aware of the other. Investigations later revealed the Dinapa's captain was watching a movie while the crew partied, and neither ship had a functioning radio. The collision ignited the tanker's 1,000 tons of gasoline, causing a massive explosion that engulfed the Dinapa in flames. Those who survived the initial blast faced the added peril of oil-slicked waters and locked life jackets, forcing them to jump into the flames without flotation. It took an hour before a nearby ship rescued 26 survivors. The tragedy claimed around 2,800 lives, marking the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in history.